That ramp is community infrastructure, and your launch privileges are suspended until you bring your dock into compliance. That was Brenda Halsey, 2 terms into her presidency, of the Cedar Hollow Lakefront Association, standing at the head of the public boat ramp on a Tuesday morning in May, reading me a suspension notice for a launch I had been using since before her subdivision had a name. The ramp she was guarding sat on a strip of shoreline her own homeowners used every summer weekend. What she did not know, and never once thought to check, was that the strip of land under that ramp had been deeded to my family by recorded instrument decades before her builder ever cut the first road into the hillside, and that I held the only valid easement of record across it. If you had been standing where I was standing, holding a folder you had kept for 11 years, with a woman in a coral blazer telling you that your own ground was hers, what would you have done? My name is Roy Dalton. I am 61 years old, and for 34 years I worked as a licensed land surveyor across 3 counties in the upper part of this state, the kind of work where you learn early that the ground does not lie, and the paper either matches it or it does not. I have set 10,000 corners in my life. I have stood in creek bottoms in February with a transit and a frozen field book, arguing a boundary that 2 neighbors had been ready to come to blows over, and I have watched both of them go quiet the same way every time, the moment I pulled the old deed and walked the line and the pins came up exactly where the dead man's word said they would. The ground keeps its own record. The paper, if it is honest, only reminds it. That is the whole of what I know, and it is more than most men ever need. I retired 6 years ago to the place my wife Lena and I had bought when we were young, a narrow lakefront parcel on the south arm of Spinnaker Lake. 4.5 acres with a gravel drive, a cedar-sided house I helped frame myself, and a small wooden dock that reached out over water. My grandfather fished that water out of a wooden skiff. My father set the pilings under the dock. I still drove them in with a borrowed pile driver the summer I was 9, and let me hold the line while he checked it for plumb. I learned to swim off the end of it. I taught Cole to swim off the end of it. There is a nut in the 3rd plank from the cleat that my father always said looked like an owl, and it does, and I have never once walked past it without seeing his hands. Lena passed 4 years ago. Cancer took her in the spring, quick and unfair, 11 weeks from the first scan to the last morning. And there was a stretch in the middle of it where she could still sit out on the dock in the afternoons with a blanket over her knees and watch the light come off the water. She made me promise 2 things out there, in that chair, with her voice gone thin. The first was that I would keep the place. The second was that I would not let anyone run our boy off the water he grew up on. I told her both were easy promises to keep, because nobody was trying to take either one. She looked at me the way she did when she knew something I did not, and she said, "Somebody always tries, Roy, eventually." Our son Cole was 14 then. He is 18 now, finishing his last year of school, tall and quiet and steadier than I was at his age. And he still launches his little aluminum fishing boat off that same ramp every morning. The ice is gone. He keeps a tackle box that was his mother's father's. He does not say much about her. He does not have to. The boat going out at first light says it for him. I want to tell you what the antagonist never bothered to verify, because it changes how you will hear everything that follows. The boat ramp at the mouth of the South Arm, the one Brenda Halsey called community infrastructure, was built on a parcel my grandfather recorded in his own name when this whole shoreline was timber and pasture. When the developer platted Cedar Hollow 30 years later, he drew his lines right up to that parcel and stopped, because his own surveyor told him he had to. The ramp the homeowners used, the concrete apron, the gravel turnaround, the little courtesy dock beside it, All of it sat on ground that ran with my family's deed, and the only recorded right to cross it belonged to me. The association had been using my family's land for years, on the strength of a handshake my father gave a man who was long dead. Brenda did not know that. She thought she was standing on her own turf. She was standing on mine. I should back up and tell you how the trouble started, because it did not start with the ramp. It started with my dock. The first letter came in the fall 3 years ago on association letterhead, informing me that my dock was out of compliance with a new community standard requiring all docks within the Cedar Hollow viewshed to be of uniform color, material, and length. My dock is cedar, weathered gray, 40 feet of it, built by my own hands on pilings my father set. It is not within Cedar Hollow. It is on my land, which is not part of the association, never has been, and the letter knew it well enough to use the word viewshed instead of the word property. I read it twice, set it on the kitchen table, and started a folder. On the tab I wrote the date and the word dock. That was the first sheet. By the end, the folder was 3 inches thick. I did what I always tell people to do, which is nothing dramatic. I wrote a short reply, polite and plain, stating that my parcel was not a member of the association, that my dock predated the standard by decades, and that I considered the matter closed. I sent it certified, kept the green card, and filed it. I thought that would be the end. It was the beginning. That winter, I met Brenda Halsey for the first time in person. She came up my gravel drive in a white SUV with a vanity plate that read CDRH, El Blan, parked sideways across the turnaround like she owned it, and walked to my porch in kitten heels that sank into the frost with every step. She had a clipboard and a coral blazer, and sunglasses pushed up on her head, though the sky was the color of dishwater. She did not knock. She stood at the bottom of my steps and waited for me to come out, the way you wait for a tenant, Mr. Dalton, she said. I'm Brenda Halsey, president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association, and I'm here to do a friendly compliance walkthrough of your waterfront. I came down onto the porch and put my coffee on the rail. I told her my waterfront was not hers to walk through. She smiled the way people smile when they have decided you are a problem to be managed. And she tapped her pen on the clipboard, and she looked past me at the dock and the lake like she was already pricing it. Your property is functionally part of our community, she said. Whether the paperwork is caught up or not. I asked her if she had read the paperwork she was talking about. She told me she did not need to read it, that the community standards spoke for themselves, and that she was sure a reasonable man would not want to be difficult about aesthetic harmony. I have thought about that line many times since, whether the paperwork has caught up. As though the deed were a slow child trailing behind her certainty, I told her the walkthrough was over before it started, and I picked my coffee back up, and she stood there a moment longer, deciding whether to be offended. And then she turned and went back down to the SUV in her ruined heels. That was the first of 3 times I would hear her say, out loud, that my family's ground was functionally hers. I want you to notice something about Brenda that I did not understand until much later. She was not doing this alone, and she was not doing it for the color of my dock. Her husband, Doug Halsey, ran a development company out of the county seat, and the company had been quietly buying up lots on the South Arm for 2 years, assembling a parcel large enough to build a marina and a row of townhomes that the existing shoreline could not support. I would learn the shape of it slowly, the way you learn anything by reading deeds, one conveyance at a time. A lot here under a holding company, a lot there under another. The same registered agent on every one, a law office in the county seat, if you knew to look at the bottom of the page where nobody looks. The one thing standing between Doug Halsey and his marina was access to deep water, because a marina is not a building. It is a place where boats can get in and out, and the existing shoreline on the south arm was shallow and silted everywhere except one run of frontage. The only deep water frontage on the south arm that was not already spoken for ran along the strip my grandfather had recorded. Brenda was not policing my dock. She was softening up the owner of the ground her husband needed, making the difficult man tired, making him used to letters and fines, so that when the offer came, or the annexation came, he would be too worn down to fight it. I did not know that yet. I only knew that a woman in heels was standing on my frost telling me my land was functionally hers, and that something in the way she looked past me at the water did not match the words about dock color coming out of her mouth. The escalation came in steps, and I counted every one because counting is what I do. Step 1 was the dock letter. Step 2 arrived. That spring, a notice of fine $200 for failure to bring my dock into compliance, with a schedule attached showing the fine would compound monthly. I did not pay it. I wrote across the top that the association had no jurisdiction over my parcel, photographed it, and filed it. The second sheet went into the folder under a tab marked Fines. Step 3 was the inspector. A man in a polo shirt with a laminated badge clipped to his pocket showed up at my dock in June while I was changing a piling cap, told me he was conducting a community safety inspection, and started taking photographs of my boat. He was a soft-handed man, sweating in the heat, and he had the brisk, important manner of somebody who has been told he matters. I set down my mallet and asked to see his credentials. He turned the badge toward me like it was a sheriff's star. It was laminated cardstock, the kind you run through a machine at a print shop, and it read, Cedar Hollow Compliance Division, a thing that does not exist in any law I have ever read in any state on any page. He said the association. I asked him what statute gave the association the power to inspect a private dock. He did not have an answer, because there is not one. I told him he was standing on private property and asked him to leave. He looked at my face, then at the mallet on the planking, and he left. I filed his photograph too, and under it I wrote the date and the words, fake badge, no statute, departed when asked. By midsummer, the fine notices were coming monthly, each one larger than the last, each one filed. The third notice was 400, the fourth was 6. Each arrived in the same cream envelope with the same embossed seal, a little lake and a little pine tree pressed into the corner, and I came to know the weight of them in the mailbox before I even saw the return address. I want to be honest with you about what that does to a person, because the calm I am describing was not the absence of anger. Every one of those letters landed in my chest like a small, hot coal. I would read it, standing at the mailbox, feel my jaw tighten, feel the old urge to drive to the county seat and put my hands on a desk and demand to be heard. And every time I would walk back up the drive, sit at the kitchen table where Lena used to do the bills, in the chair that still has the worn place, on the right arm where her elbow rested, and file the letter. Instead, Cole watched me do it more than once. One evening, the screen door letting in the smell of the lake, he sat across from me while I dated a notice and slid it into the folder, and he asked me why I did not just fight back. I told him the folder was fighting back. It was just doing it quietly, the way you build a case instead of a scene. He thought about that. Then he asked if it would work. I told him it had always worked every time in 34 years I had ever had the patience to let it. He nodded, and he did not ask again. But I noticed after that he started keeping the notices himself when they came, lining them up on the counter for me in the order they arrived. He had started counting too. Let me stop here for one moment and say something directly to you, because I think it matters. If a letter ever comes to your mailbox claiming authority over ground you own, do not answer it with your temper. Answer it with a folder and a date. Then come back and watch what that folder does to people who never checked. Now let me get back to it. The first ally arrived without my asking. Her name was Dawn Pruitt, and she sat on the Cedar Hollow board, the only one of 5 members who had voted against the dock standard. Dawn caught me at the gas station in town one Saturday, by the air pump while I was topping off a tire. She came over with her cart, looked over both shoulders, like a woman crossing a street she should not be on, and told me in a low voice that the board had been told my parcel was being annexed, that Brenda had presented it as a done deal, and that nobody on the board had asked to see the annexation paperwork, because Brenda said it was with the lawyers. I asked her, plainly, had she ever seen the paperwork? She said no. She said nobody had. She said Brenda ran the meetings the way a person runs a meeting when she does not want questions, fast, with the votes already counted, and that the one time Dawn had asked to see the annexation file, Brenda had told her it was a legal matter. Dawn was not sure why she was telling me. I think she was a decent person who had started to smell something, and who had spent 2 years voting yes on small things she had not looked at closely, and had finally hit one she could not stomach. I thanked her. I did not push her. A frightened witness is a witness you keep. By not crowding, I went home and filed what she said the way I file everything, with the date and her name at the top. Because a witness is a kind of document too, and a board member who will say out loud that the annexation file is empty is worth more than any letter I had collected yet. That fall, the campaign widened, and this is the part where the year turned hard. Brenda stopped writing letters about my dock and started writing them about my access. A notice arrived, informing me that, effective immediately, my launch privileges at the South Arm ramp were suspended pending compliance, and that the association had installed a coded gate across the access road to enforce the suspension. I drove down to look. There was a gate, a steel arm with a keypad on a yellow post, blocking the gravel road that ran down to the ramp. The road my son drove every morning. The road that crossed my family's recorded easement. The only recorded right-of-way across that ground which ran to us and to nobody else. I got out and stood in front of it. I put my hand on the cold steel of the arm. I thought about my father driving that same road in a green pickup with a skiff in the bed, and about Lena in the chair, telling me somebody always tries. I stood there looking at that gate for a long time, and I felt the second promise I made to her, sitting on my shoulders like a hand. Then I got back in the truck, drove home, and added the gate to the folder with the date and a photograph, and the keypad's location measured off the center line of the easement because I already knew where that post was standing. That was the Tuesday morning Brenda met me at the head of the ramp with the suspension notice in her hand, the morning I started this story with. She read it to me like a sentence from a bench. That ramp is community infrastructure, and your launch privileges are suspended until you bring your dock into compliance. Behind her, 2 of her homeowners were backing a wakeboard boat down the very ramp she was guarding, onto the very water she was telling me I could not touch. I looked at her, and I looked at the gate, and I did the only thing I have ever found that works. I went home and opened the folder. What I did next took 11 weeks and not one raised voice, and I am going to walk you through it because the method is the whole point. I drove to the county recorder's office, the same office where I had spent a good part of my working life, and pulled the chain of title on every parcel along the south arm, including the ramp parcel and the access strip. The clerk knew me. She brought out the big flat books, the ones with the marbled covers, and the heavy cream pages, and she left me at the long oak table by the window, and I sat in that quiet room, and I read the ground, backward, deed by deed, grantor to grantee, the way I had read 1,000 boundaries in my working life. It is patient work. You go back one conveyance at a time, you match the call to the call before it, you watch the meets and bounds hold steady across the years, and you wait for the moment the modern map and the old words line up. And there it was, exactly where I knew it would be. My grandfather's recorded deed, the date in the margin, in a clerk's careful hand, from a time before any of these subdivisions existed. The meets and bounds running down to and along the water, the ramp parcel inside it, the access strip inside it, the whole apron of ground the association had been treating as its own, and recorded right beside it, in the next book, the easement my father had granted. A narrow personal right-of-way that ran to my family and to my family alone, not to the association, not to Cedar Hollow. To us, I copied every page. I paid the clerk for certified copies, stamped and sealed, and I drove home with them on the seat beside me like passengers. Then I did the thing that ended it before anyone in a blazer knew it was ending. I pulled the title on the ramp parcel itself, the small piece the courtesy dock sat on, and I followed it forward instead of back, and I found that it had passed out of an old estate 4 years earlier, when an heir nobody could locate let it go, and was sitting unsold and nearly forgotten in the inventory of a county land bank, listed for back taxes. I read that entry 3 times to be sure I had it right. The dock the entire subdivision launched from, the courtesy dock, 50 families tied up to on summer weekends, stood on a parcel nobody in Cedar Hollow actually owned. Doug Halsey's company had been so busy assembling lots up and down the arm for the marina that they had stepped right over the little parcel under their own feet, the one piece of ground that mattered most, because it controlled the only safe launch on the south arm. I sat with that for a moment in the quiet room. Then I went to the land bank office, filled out the form, and paid the back taxes, $11,400 by cashier's check. I filed the deed, and I recorded it on a Thursday afternoon, and I watched the clerk press the stamp into the corner and write the time in the margin. I told no one. I drove home, made dinner, and sat with Cole on the porch while the light went off the water and a heron worked the shallows by the old dock. He asked me if I had figured anything out at the county. I told him I had bought us a little insurance. He asked what kind. I told him the kind you keep in a drawer and hope you never have to show. I did not tell him what it was. I wanted it quiet a little longer. Now I want to be careful here, because the calm I kept was not the same as inaction. And the document I had found was not going to deploy itself. Brenda had committed fully. The gate was up. The fines were compounding toward $4,000 on paper. And Dawn Pruitt called me one night, her voice shaking, to tell me that Brenda had announced at the last board meeting that the association would be moving to formally annex my parcel and condemn the dock as a navigational hazard, and that Doug's company would be presenting marina plans to the County Planning Commission at the public hearing in 3 weeks. Dawn said the word marina out loud for the first time, and I heard the whole shape of it click into place. The dock color, the view shed, the gate, none of it had ever been about standards. It had been about clearing the one owner who sat on the deep water Doug needed. I thanked Dawn, and I filed it, and I marked the date of the planning hearing on the kitchen calendar, in pencil. Before that hearing, Brenda crossed the line that took the whole thing out of the realm of homeowner squabble. It was a Saturday in early morning, the kind of cold, clear morning Cole loved for fishing, frost still on the dock boards, the lake flat as poured glass. He drove down to the ramp before light to put his aluminum boat in. The gate was locked, the keypad changed overnight, and a private contractor Brenda had hired was parked across the access strip with a flatbed and a set of bolt cutters, there to remove what the notice called the non-compliant private dock. My dock. On my land. The dock. My father set the pilings under. The dock with the owl knot in the third plank. Cole called me from the ramp, and I want you to hear how that call actually sounded, because the profile of a frightened kid on a phone is not a tidy thing, and I will not smooth it for you. Dad, there's a truck. There's a guy. He's got cutters. He's at the dock. He says he's supposed to take it out. I told him it's ours. He won't listen, Dad. What do I do? I told him to stand back on our own ground, off the ramp, up by the truck, and not to touch anything, and not to touch the man, and to keep his phone up and recording the whole time. He said okay. His voice was shaking. I told him I was already moving. Then I drove down faster than I should have, with the certified copies on the seat where I had kept them since the recorder's office, and I called the sheriff's office on the way and told them there was a man with bolt cutters on private property and that I was 4 minutes out. A deputy named Marcus Webb met me at the ramp. He was young, careful, the kind of officer who does the job by the book, because the book is all that protects him. He had his hat off and his thumbs in his belt, and he was standing in the exact middle of the gravel between the contractor's flatbed and my son, like a man who has been trained to stand between things. He told me plainly that the association had filed a work order and a claim of authority, and that absent a clear showing of ownership, he could not simply order a contractor off what was being represented to him. He was not on anyone's side. He said it twice, almost like an apology, that he was not on anyone's side, that a filed complaint had to be worked, whether he liked the people who filed it or not, and that he had no way standing there in the cold to tell whose ground he was on. He was a man standing between two claims with no way to tell which was real. He told me that if I had documentation, now was the time. So I opened the folder on the hood of his cruiser, and I laid it out for him the way I would lay out a survey for a judge, in order, oldest to newest. The recorded deed, certified and sealed, my grandfather's date in the margin. The easement, granted to my family, and to my family alone. And the new deed to the ramp parcel I had bought from the land bank, the one with my name on it and the recorder's stamp 11 days old. The parcel, the courtesy dock, and the flatbed, and the deputy's own boots were all sitting on at that moment. He read them in the cold light. He read them twice. I watched his eyes go from the page to the ramp, to the flatbed, and back, doing the same thing I do, matching the paper to the ground. Then he straightened up, and he turned to the contractor, and he told him to load his cutters and leave, because the ground he was standing on, the ramp, the courtesy dock, the access strip, every inch of it, belonged to the man whose paperwork he was now holding. The contractor started to argue. Marcus told him the work order had been issued by people who did not own the property. That proceeding now would be destruction of one man's property, on another man's complaint, and that he could leave, under his own power, or be part of a report. The contractor loaded his cutters. Marcus handed the folder back and said, "Quiet, just to me, that I might want to bring those same papers to the planning hearing, because he had a feeling the marina people did not know what I knew." I did not gloat. I want to be clear about that, because the temptation was there, and I let it pass. I drove Cole home, made him breakfast, and watched his hand stop shaking around the second cup of coffee. I told him not yet. There was one more room. The Planning Commission hearing was held on a Tuesday evening in the county building, and the room was full, because word of a new marina travels in a town like ours. Doug Halsey presented first slides and renderings, a row of townhomes, and a long marina reaching out into the South Arm, 50 slips, a restaurant, a future. Brenda sat in the front row in a magenta blazer, pearls at her throat. And when the chairman opened the floor, she stood without being recognized and said, for the third time in my hearing and the first time in front of a public body, that the Dalton parcel was functionally part of the Cedar Hollow community, and that the association expected the commission to support its annexation. Then she sat down, satisfied. Certain, a woman who had never once in 3 years read the deed she was talking over. When my turn came, I walked to the podium with the folder. I did not make a speech. I have heard men try to win these rooms with speeches and lose them, because a speech is a thing a commission can disagree with, and a recorded deed is not. I laid 3 documents on the table in front of the commission, and I named them in order, the way you read a boundary. Slow, one call at a time. The recorded deed, with the date my grandfather recorded it, the meets and bounds running down to and along the South Arm, the ramp parcel, and the access strip, both inside its lines. The recorded easement, granted to my family, and to my family alone, the only valid right-of-way across that ground in the public record. And the deed, 11 days recorded to the ramp parcel itself, purchased from the county land bank for back taxes, with my name on it. I asked the commission's own counsel to verify them against the county's records on the screen behind her, so that nothing would rest on my word. She did not take my word for any of it. She pulled the parcels up one at a time, on the county's own system, the same maps I had read, and she traced the lines with a laser pointer while the room watched the screen. The room got very quiet. You could hear the projector fan. Doug Halsey's marina, every slip of it, depended on access to deep water across ground that the public record now showed, plainly and without argument, belonged to me. The courtesy dock. His whole subdivision launched from, sat on a parcel I had owned for 11 days. There was no annexation on file. There never had been. Brenda had told her board it was with the lawyers, and there were no lawyers because there was nothing to file, and the screen behind the council showed the same empty space where the annexation should have been that I had been looking at for 3 years. Council finished reading, looked up at the chairman, and said that the application could not proceed as presented because the applicant did not control the access the plan required, and that the parcels in question were of record in the name of Mr. Brett Dalton. That was the whole reveal. No raised voice. A woman reading a screen and a date and a name. I stood at the podium and let the silence hold for one long moment, the way you let a level settle before you read it, and I did not say a single word more because the paper had already said all of it, and anything I added, the consequences fell exactly where the overreach had pointed them, which is the only kind of justice I trust. The Planning Commission denied the marina application that night on the record, with the reason stated plainly in the minutes. The applicant did not control the access the project required. Doug Halsey sat very still while the chairman read it. Brenda did not. She stood again, uninvited, and started to say that there had to be some mistake, that the annexation was in process, that the association's counsel could clarify, and the chairman asked her, in front of the room, which counsel and what was the case number, and on what date had the annexation been filed. She had no number, she had no date. She had told her board it was with the lawyers, and there were no lawyers, because there was nothing to file. And now the question had been asked out loud by a man with a gavel, and there was no fast meeting to run it past. She sat down. Doug Halsey's company had spent, by the accounting that later came out in the local paper, near $200,000 assembling lots for a marina it could never build. Because the deep water access at the heart of it had belonged to my family the entire time. $200,000 against the $11,400 I had paid for the one parcel they forgot to look at. The association's fines against me, which had compounded on paper to $4,100, were void from the first letter because there had never been a parcel for them to attach to. I had collected 0 of their fines and paid 0 of them. They had spent $200,000 and a presidency. That is the pair of numbers I keep, 0 and 200,000. Brenda Halsey resigned from the board within the month, after the minutes Dawn Pruitt had quietly preserved. Every meeting, in her own careful hand, showed she had reported a non-existent annexation as fact to 5 board members into a public commission. There was talk for a while of whether that rose to fraud. I did not push it. The loss of the marina and the loss of the chair were the proportionate thing, and I have never had any use for grinding a person past the point. The ground itself had already made. The gate came down because the gate had always stood on my access strip, and a county crew pulled the post and the keypad went into a property bag, and the gravel road my son drives every morning ran open again. Dawn finished her term as the only board member who had voted no, and the new board sent me a short letter, on plain paper this time, no embossed seal, asking whether the homeowners might continue to use the ramp. I wrote back that they could, by my permission, in writing, renewable each year the same way every right across that ground had always run. By permission. In writing, the way it should have run all along. I want to bring you back up the gravel drive now, because the part that matters most to me did not happen in that county room. It happened the next morning on our own dock. The cedar one my father set the pilings for, the one a man with bolt cutters had been sent to cut down. The frost had burned off, and the water was throwing back the early sun. Cole had his aluminum boat in the water before the sun was full up, the way he does, the tackle box that was his grandfather's open on the seat. He looked back at me from the bow, 18 years old, steady, his mother's steadiness in the set of his jaw, and he asked if it was really ours now. All of it, the ramp too. I told him it had always been ours. We just had to show them where the line was. He nodded, like that made sense to him, because to a kid who grew up on this water, it always had. Lena's chair was still on the dock where she used to sit, the one she watched the light from in those last weeks. I sat in it for a minute while he idled out past the courtesy dock that was mine now, and into the deep water that had been ours all along. And I thought about the 2 promises she pulled out of me in that chair. And I thought about somebody always tries, Roy, and I let myself believe I had kept them both. The boat got small out on the arm. The owl knot was under my boot where it has always been. The ground had kept its record, and the paper had matched it, and that was enough. So here is the lesson, plainly, the way I would tell it to a neighbor across a fence. If someone with a clipboard tells you your ground is functionally theirs, do not argue with them in the road. Go to the county recorder and pull your chain of title all the way back and read the ground backward until the paper and the dirt agree. Walk your boundaries with the deed in your hand. Keep a folder with dates and put every letter in it, even the ones that make your jaw tighten, especially those. Find out who owns the little forgotten parcels around you, because the people coming for your land often step right over the one piece that beats them. Documentation is slow and it is quiet, and it does not feel like winning while you are doing it. The deed that is older and cleaner than the claim will end the argument in one motion, in the one room where it counts, and you will not have to raise your voice to do it. If you have a story like this one, a fence line, a gate, a letter that claimed authority it never had, put it down in the comments because I read them, and so do the folks who need to hear they are not alone. Subscribe if you want to ride along for the next one. Because next week I want to tell you about a retired dam engineer whose HOA ordered him to drain the private pond his great-grandfather built right up until the spring melt reminded everyone downstream exactly why he had built it where he did. Keep your folder, walk your line. I will see you on the water.